Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I've seen the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, they're sold in stores. Yeah. People will often ask their kids to go to the store and be like, "Yeah, choose which cane you want."
Wait, are they still sold in stores? Okay, this is a big debate in our household because I'm convinced they are not sold anymore. But where do you go? Where do you get your? Not you.
You want a cane?
Where are canes commonly sold?
Like on the street, like the shops.
Like the mom and pop shops?
Underneath, like the HDB flats. A lot of shops, yeah. Even like if you go to a hardware store, you're going to find canes like hanging up, different coloured handles. And then
Where
you can
I get me one of these?
I'm shocked. I'm literally here in my American shock. And Jasmine's like, wait a second. I need 3. Hello and welcome to the Forties Formula, your go-to place for insightful discussions on navigating your 40s and thriving in this transformative decade.
We're your hosts, Amanda and Jasmin, 2 women that are passionate about exploring the challenges and adventures that come with turning 40 and what lies ahead.
So Kelly Tay is here with us today, and I have to address the elephant in the room, which is that Kelly and I are actually neighbors. We live on the same street, and we see each other almost every single day. But that's not how we met. We actually met because we were following each other on Instagram, and then we later realized that our sons had been in kitty class together, and again, we were across the street neighbors. So I'm so glad that I finally had the chance to chat with you in person.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's just such proof that Singapore is such a small country.
Oh my gosh, the smallest.
Yeah.
Talk about a small
you
world.
being like, wait, are you that Amanda?
Like something is familiar here. But,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. And again, back to Instagram, right? I love your tagline. I help Asians stop hitting their kids. That's about the best, vouch for a coach that I could ever hear about. And, I'm an Angmo. I married into a Singaporean Chinese family. I definitely see a diversity of parenting styles, just not only within my family, but within the generations in my family, because we live in a multi-generational home. And I'm wondering how you define Asian parenting. Like, what does that even mean to you?
Yeah, so Asian parenting, let's talk about the good. I think Asian parents are very well known for physically providing for their kids very well, financially providing for their kids really well. What they're not so good at, though, is the emotional aspect, right? Validating emotions, helping people express and process emotions, not just the good ones, but also the difficult ones. That we're not so good at. And being emotionally available for our kids, not so good at that. And I think when you think about traditional Asian parenting, oftentimes it's very harsh. It's characterized by very punitive discipline. And, it's not just words, but it's also caning. Like in Singapore, there's like rattan cane, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I've seen the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, they're sold in stores. Yeah. People will often ask their kids to go to the store and be like, "Yeah, choose which cane you want."
Wait, are they still sold in stores? Okay, this is a big debate in our household because I'm convinced they are not sold anymore. But where do you go? Where do you get your? Not you.
You want a cane?
Where are canes commonly sold?
Like on the street, like the shops.
Like the mom and pop shops?
Underneath, like the HDB flats. A lot of shops, yeah. Even like if you go to a hardware store, you're going to find canes like hanging up, different coloured handles. And then
Where
you can
I get me one of these?
I'm shocked. I'm literally here in my American shock. And Jasmine's like, wait a second. I need 3.
I'm Indian. Yeah. And so we get that. I'm British Indian, so I also get the emotional side. But sometimes, oh my God, my kids do my nutting, and I'm just like, I really want to slap you right now. Yeah. I might even say it. I'm not going to, because obviously they do drive me nuts. How can you stop yourself from, getting to that point with your kids? Because they don't fucking listen.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. So on the not listening, what I always tell my clients is that we say they're not listening, but actually what we mean is they're not complying. They're not doing what we want them to do. I guarantee you they're listening. They know what they're doing. It's not okay with you. Yeah. They know what your boundary is. They're just having a hard time complying with that boundary. And that for us is very, very triggering. And so for your question of how do I stop myself from hitting my kids? Like I got caned as a kid. Very common in Singapore. And what I always remind myself of is, what do I want to teach my kid at the end of the day? And if I'm hitting, I'm teaching them that if someone pisses you off, go ahead, hit them back. Violence is the solution, right? And it's very funny, oftentimes we're yelling at our kids, we're saying, stop shouting, but we're shouting.
Yes.
But it goes nowhere because we're essentially telling them to not do the thing that we are doing. And so I always kind of bring it back to, what do I want to teach my kids in this moment? What enduring lesson am I trying to provide? And do I want them to solve their problems with violence, with icing someone out? It doesn't have to be physical violence. It can be emotional neglect. It can be saying, you know what, I'm not talking to you until blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of catch myself. I don't do it all the time. I'm not perfect. I teach this stuff and it's still hard for me. And I think it's good to recognize that and to normalize that. Like, we are all humans. Like, this thing I tell my clients, like, we're humans, we're not robots.
Yeah.
You are allowed to make mistakes. What's important is what do you do after? Can you repair well? That's really crucial to me.
Hey Amanda, do you know of a really easy way to give your kids some good gut bacteria?
I do indeed. I'm giving my family a Keezy Wellness Elderberry Boost. They come in these little sachets. You just rip them open, pour it right in your mouth.
That sounds like fun. And I bet I could add that to their smoothies and some Greek yogurt too.
And what I love about a Keezy is that you can take it any time of day, and there's a product for all ages, even my 12-week-old little guy.
Akisi believe that food is medicine, so the products are clean and have no gums and fillers. They also take a science-forward approach and include pre, post, probiotics, as well as polyphenols.
And the best thing is, you can get 15% off full-price items with free delivery when you use code Forties at checkout for any purchases in Singapore from their website, akizywellness.com.
And don't forget to check out their new Akisi Berry and Akisi Tropical flavors too. Now back to the chat.
So I think when we talk about Asian parenting, what comes to mind is generally quite harsh, quite punitive. And so, that tagline, I help Asian parents stop hitting their kids.
Yeah, love it.
People often have a very visceral reaction to it. So recently I had a talk at Google. I was invited to speak to mums over there. And the person who was organizing it, she was like, can we tone this down a little? Like, when we introduce you, can we not use hitting kids?
Oh, interesting.
And so we had a conversation about that, about how, at the end of the day, we have to call a spade a spade. It's important because this is how we move forward. This is how we make changes. If we continue just hiding behind euphemisms and, things are not as bad as they are. No, they're bad. When we boil it down, we are hitting our kids. That's not okay, right? If you switch kids with spouse, that's not okay. You can't hit your spouse, right? Like, you'll go to jail.
Yeah.
But you can hit your kids. And why? Why the double standard? Because they're younger? Because they can't fight back? Why? And so I think that conversation is important to have. And it's difficult to have because it is so ingrained in Asian culture. It's so ingrained. And lots of times people tell you, but I got cane, I'm fine, what? So it is hard, but it is a conversation we have to have. And that's why I've been stubborn about keeping that tagline there.
Yeah.
I help Asian parents stop hitting their kids.
Yeah. Well, some of us love it, all right? I'm all over your page because of that tagline. So, and you just hit on something that's, always confounding to me, right? So you've got this generational thing of the punitive discipline and the hitting the kids and the caning. And it's like, but then you've also got this Asian concept of filial piety.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you don't question the elders and and you make sure that you are obeying. How do you help break through the generational cycle of the hitting, but also maintaining the respect? Because I think that's where a lot of people's stopping point is.
Yeah, for sure. I think, with filial piety, one thing I want to make clear is that I love the concept. I think in its essence, in its true form, I love it. And it's all about honoring our elders, respecting them, appreciating them. That, no problems with. I think it's great. Long may it continue. What I have an issue with is when people say that then means you cannot disagree with your elders. Even respectfully, it's not okay to say something different. It's not okay to choose something different. And then what happens is you have entire generations of people who are just doing what their parents expect them to do and want them to do, but inside feeling very resentful. The parent-child relationship, even in adult stage, is crumbling. It's not authentic. And so that really doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve the elders. They don't have the relationship they want with their kids. It doesn't serve the people who are now adults because they're not living the life they want to lead, right? And they're not parenting the way they want to. And so I think the other component of filial piety is this idea of obligation, where I am obliged to listen to you, to agree with everything you say, to say and to do what you want me to do. But I think that's really tricky, right? Because at the end of the day, why do we want our kids to obey us out of obligation? I want my kids to come and move along with the direction that I have set out because they want to, because they see the wisdom in it, because they see me as a supportive leader. Not because they're like, oh, mother said so, I have to do it. So I think that concept of filial piety is always very tricky to me. It feels very transactional. It's like, because I've done all these things for you, you now have to do all these things for me. And I'm like, well, yes, I agree. Wouldn't it be nice if our kids did do all the lovely things for us? But the key difference is because they want to, not because they feel obliged to. And I think about Chinese New Year. I think about Raya recently happened. And, people are often like, I hate going to these things. I hate seeing my elders. They're going to ask me intrusive questions. They're going to push my boundaries, but I can't do anything about it. And when I think about that, I always feel it's such a shame. What if we could have an authentic relationship with our elders where there was mutual respect? Where we didn't just say, okay, I'm just going to quietly take this and then inside be ragey,
yes.
right? What example are we then setting for our kids? So I would love to envision a world. I would love if my kids, 20 years from now came back for Chinese New Year because they wanted to and because they love spending time with me. And I also want to be clear on the Asian parenting bit. When I talk about Asian parenting, a lot of times people then extrapolate that I'm saying Western parenting has all the answers. And I want to be clear that it is fruitless, right, to kind of pit the two against each other.
Yeah.
For one, they're not monolithic. There are similarities, but, not all Asian parents are the same. Some don't hit their kids. Not all Western parents are the same. Some do hit their kids, right? So they are separate. We're not pitting the two against each other. We're not comparing. I'm not saying this is better, that is better. I'm saying let's look at Asian parenting, what it traditionally is, and how we can redefine that in a modern age where we don't have to be punitive and harsh and hit our kids in order to raise successful kids. And I think the tragedy of all of this is that, in my view, Asian parents are kick-ass. Kick-ass. We are willing to do what it takes to give our kids a leg up. We will sacrifice stuff. We will turn our lives around for them. We will literally give them all the financial resources and keep very little for ourselves, right?
So, Gal, I was balancing the books on our family budget the other day, and I realized...
You're spending too much on workout clothes?
Oh, yes, that is also true. But also the fact that we're not spending as much as we used to on the high-quality meat and produce since we switched over to the Meat Club.
The Meat Club's commitment to removing unnecessary costs but ensuring top-quality meat is the main reason why we stick with them too.
Their founder, Amy Bell, was a lot like you and I, struggling to find good quality produce at good prices here in Singapore. And that's why she started the Meat Club. And the commitment to that genuine savings is still at the heart of the business.
And as an added treat, our listeners can get $12 off their first order by using discount code TFF12. There's no minimum spend and discounts are only valid through their website, themeatclub.com.sg.
And don't forget to follow the Meat Club on Instagram at themeatclubsg. And now, back to the chat.
We have that drive and that desire to do better. I think we are great. And imagine if we could just augment that.
Yeah.
With a more compassionate way of parenting. Doesn't mean we have to be permissive, but more compassionate and bring that into parenting. I think we would be unstoppable if we could do that.
I think that's brilliant. And I feel like I get this kind of conflict as well because you're talking about, respecting your elders, and I feel like I get that from above.
Yeah.
And then I'm seeing my kids, I'm trying to teach them manners and, be respectful. And then they'll go to school and, some kid will be like, what? And I'm like, oh, it's pardon, but I can't say it to someone else's kid, and then my kids pick it up.
Yeah.
So, is there a way that you can kind of get your kids to understand, there is respect for your elders, but, the way you talk to your friends is very different, the way you talk to elders, and how do you sort of manage it so that your kids are not picking up bad behaviours from other people? I feel like there's this whole sort of cobweb of things that you need to try to do, and it's so tough to do it all,
It's very true, and it's a very real thing, right? Influences from school or from peer groups that come into your home, and that's like, no, I didn't sign up for that. I didn't teach you that.
Yeah.
I think what I try to tell my clients is just focus on what you can control.
Yeah.
So you can't control what other kids are going to say and what your kid is going to be exposed to. What's really important is you can control at home what boundaries you set and what expectations you set. So if they come home with some what instead of pardon, then it can be, hey, I know you may be hearing these things at school and it's okay to experiment. I just want to let you know that a better way to say that is pardon. Let me tell you why. And then, you can explain. But I think it's really important to not come in and be like, you say one more time, I bring the kid. I think it's really important to not go there because then it just becomes a power struggle. No one wins, right? In a power struggle, nobody wins. Versus coming to it as, hey, I'm not seeing the worst in you. I'm not seeing you as coming in and deliberately being a little shit, right? I'm seeing you as you're curious, you picked up something, you're learning, you're testing the boundaries. Is this acceptable at home? What is mom going to say? And then mom comes in and says, yeah, this is what I believe. And that's really, really important because a lot of times parents feel, you know what, I have no control over this, so well, I'll just let it slide. No, do not let it slide. That's permissive parenting. We've got to come in with authority and be clear on what we expect to see from our kids. The key is doing it without being punitive and without having this like power dynamic of like, do it because I said so.
Yeah.
It's more, I'm telling you, this is my expectation, this is why, and I will work with you to develop that skill. And I think skills building is so important. A lot of times people think that I'll say it to my kids once and they're going to get it. But like that doesn't happen. And people get very frustrated. They feel like they should know by now. And I'm like, you are allowed to feel frustrated. Also remember you're dealing with a kid and kids' brains don't fully develop till like the late 20s. The part of the
Fucking hell.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but it's true. The part of the brain that's responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control, the ability to say pardon instead of what, right? Like those things really, your brain fully develops in your late 20s. So it's a skill. It takes time. And if we can give our kids that grace, then I think we will all be happier in general. Because, you know, no kid wants to feel like my mom only sees the worst in me all the time, you know. So that's something I try to remember. And I will acknowledge that it's hard to remember in the moment. Because it's like, you little shit.
I'm definitely going to struggle with that because, like, obviously, the first time they say something they're not supposed to, like, I think one of the kids used fuck once, and I was just like, okay, look, we don't speak like that in this house. It's not good. You don't want your teacher to hear you saying it. To my elder son, I'll say, look, whatever you say with your friends is fine. Just don't say it around your brothers. Don't say it around elders. Definitely don't want, you know, myself or any of the other elders to hear you speak that way. And then the other day we were at dinner and my eldest son, who's nearly 9, says to one of the twins, swear to God, for whatever they were talking about. And he goes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh at this, but he goes, fuck you, God. And I was like, oh my God, like, what did he just say? And obviously he knows as well not to use that word. Right. And he was like, I got confused. I thought you told me to swear to God. And then obviously I reacted straight away. Yeah. And then after I calmed down, I basically told him, like, okay, Ken, I understand you got confused. He didn't actually mean swear at God. What he meant was, you know, you need to promise not to do this. Right. So we had to explain it, but obviously my initial reaction was like, you don't speak like that. Yeah. And so it's so tough, isn't it, to sort of, in the moment, try to remember to be calm when all this is going on.
My kids are tiny, right?
Yeah.
So my kids are 4, 2, and brand new. And I remember seeing somewhere that when you're about to lose your S on these kids, look at their little hands and their little feet. And just remember, well, I'm like literally crying. Yeah. This is sad. See, that's what I meant about being soft. But it's like, remember how their brains are so still developing and they're so small. And the mistakes they're making are not because they want to. You know, they're because they're little. They're learning.
Exactly.
Oh my God,
You're getting teary.
Somebody help me. But that being said about learning, right? I think one of the big learning experiences in our household is having my Singaporean Chinese traditionally raised husband and my very American, very Western way of parenting clashing together. And it's not always a clash, but sometimes it's an accidental one. We don't realize that the other one had such a different upbringing that what that person is about to do is completely foreign to us. Yeah. Do you work with a lot of mixed families like ours? Do you see that clash, and how do you help families deal with that?
Yeah, I do actually. You know, it's interesting. So being the journalist I am, I looked up the population numbers. So the latest available numbers in 2022, 1/3 of all citizen marriages were transnational.
Wow.
1/3.
Yeah.
Look at us.
And that represents a 29% increase from the year before in 2021.
Oh, wow.
30% in just 1 year.
Oh, and what is that expiring? So I can mark that in my calendar.
So I mean, I don't think it's going anywhere, right? And I see this reflected in my client base as well. I do get quite a few clients who are both Singaporean or Asian and then non-Asian. And what your experience is exactly what their experience is. And what mine is, my husband's Canadian. And I think sometimes for us, in these sorts of marriages, the starkness of that contrast is very visible immediately, right? And it's actually a good thing because it forces you to be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more reflective on like, if that person had such a different response and a different upbringing,
Yeah, and I think,
What does that
I
mean?
was just trying to think of an example
Does
that
that
came up
mean
at our
mine
house
was
recently,
right,
right? Like of
not
when
right?
so
Does it mean
perfect
his
example.
was right,
I've got
not right?
my 4-year-old daughter,
Where do we land
girl,
here?
daughter,
And I
my
think
2-year-old
sometimes that's a bit
son,
harder to
right?
tease out when you
and
have
my 2-year-old, when
marriages
they get
that
home
are
from
from the
school, they
same
change
culture
from their school
because you
uniforms into
likely
their
have
regular
a similar
clothes,
upbringing.
right? And
However,
there
at
was
the
one
same
day where my
time,
son
even
took
in
off his
those
pants and
marriages,
was running around the
there will be
house, and everyone was
differences
like,
because
"Oh,
no
Archie,
two
put on your
families are
pants."
the same.
And then
Maybe
my
even the
daughter
way
took
how
off her
you
pants
argue,
and went running around the
how
house.
you decide whether
And
you're going
my
to
father-in-law
cane or
was like,
not cane.
Louise, put on your
There will
pants.
be
Shame, shame,
differences
shame.
in there.
Shame,
And
shame,
what I
shame.
always tell my clients
And
is
I was
to
like, okay,
pay
couple
attention
things
to
here.
those differences because
Number
they are a
one,
good
it is really
point
weird for me to
of
hear
reflection
like
to just
shame,
see,
shame, shame shouted at a kid.
okay,
It's like definitely not
clearly
something
there's
that
a
we would
different
do
way
in
of
Western
doing this.
parenting,
Where
where
do
you're just
I
like,
land now?
just the active
the
running
beauty of
around
being a
is
parent is
shameful.
that you now have
And
your
secondly,
own chance,
it was
your own
directly
opportunity
for
to
her.
set a different path for
Archie
your
was
kids.
pantless for like
there's
3
an
minutes
expiry
prior,
on blaming
but
your
when
parents.
she got pantless, shame,
you don't
shame, shame.
get to just,
And that was one of those stark differences where I was like, I don't know, my husband sees how weird this is. So
Yeah, I mean, in adulthood, at some point,
I
we
found
do
that
have to let
really
that go
weird
and
when your
decide,
dad
okay, what are
shouted
we doing
shame
now?
at Louise
And
for
I
taking
think
off
for
her
me,
pants.
once
And he
I
was like,
understood that,
oh yeah,
it
I
was
guess
so
that was
liberating.
weird. But
For me, it was like, wow,
no one had
I'm
ever
the
called his
boss.
attention
I
to
get to
it.
do what I want.
This is the
And
first
not
time.
in
So
a,
I think,
power
like you said, it's a
hungry
jumping off point
Godzilla
for
way, like, I'm going to
conversations.
trample on everything.
And
But really, in a, wow, I can step
nowhere
into my own
clearer
power. I can
than with
decide what this
discipline,
looks like for my
right?
family.
And that's
Whether I'm
such
taking a little
huge
bit from
theme
what
on
my
your
husband's
page,
culture
which is
does,
how do
whether
we
I'm holding on
establish
to some of
healthy
what my
discipline
culture
for
does,
kids,
whether
and how
I'm
do we
creating
stay
something different, wholly
consistent with our
different in the
discipline
process.
across
That's very empowering for
caregivers,
me.
right? In our house,
And
we
I
have
think,
5
I was
adult
just trying to think of an
caregivers, my
example
2
that came up
in-laws,
at our house
myself
recently,
and my
like
husband and my
when
helper.
so
So
perfect
what are some
example,
tips that
I've
you
got
have for
my
keeping
4-year-old daughter,
discipline
girl
consistent
daughter,
across
and
that
my 2-year-old
team?
son, right? And my 2-year-old, when they get home from school, they change from their school uniforms into their regular clothes, right? And there was one day where my son took off his pants and was running around the house, and everyone was like, "Oh, Archie, put on your pants." And then my daughter took off her pants and went running around the house. And my father-in-law was like, "Oh, Louise, put on your pants. Shame, shame, shame. Shame, shame, shame."
Yeah, there sure are.
And I was like, okay, couple things here. Number one, it is really weird for me to hear like shame, shame, shame shouted at a kid. It's like definitely
Okay.
not something that we would do in Western parenting, where you're just like, just the active running around is shameful. And secondly,
I mean,
it was
honestly, yes.
directly-
That's what I thought when you
Archie
said
was
it.
pantless for like 3 minutes prior, but when she got pantless, shame, shame, shame.
Yeah.
And that was one of those stark differences where I was like, wow, I don't know that my husband sees how weird this is.
Yeah.
So at the, that night when we were going to bed, I was like, I found that really weird when your dad shouted shame at Louise for taking off her pants. And he was like, oh yeah, I guess that was weird. But no one had ever called his attention to it.
Yeah.
This is the first time. So I think, like you said, it's a jumping off point for conversations.
Yeah.
And perhaps nowhere clearer than with discipline.
Yes.
Right? And that's such a huge thing on your page, which is how do we establish healthy discipline for kids, and how do we stay consistent with our discipline across caregivers, right? In our house, we have 5 adult caregivers, my 2 in-laws, myself and my husband, and my helper.
Yeah.
So what are some tips that you have for keeping discipline consistent across that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very real question that people face all the time, and especially in an Asian culture where we do parent with other caregivers. We rely very much on grandparent help, much more so than in other societies where you move away from your family unit, right? And then we also have helpers, and so there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, there sure are.
So the first place I always start with is to tell people to think about the meaning of the word discipline first. Let's just get clear on what discipline means.
Okay.
Because a lot of times people see discipline as it's something where the parent has to come in and lay the smack down.
I mean, honestly, yes. That's what I thought when you said it.
Okay, so I think about discipline very differently. And so I studied literature in school. I was a journalist. I'm very wordy. I like looking into the meaning of words. And so actually, if you peel back the etymology of the word discipline, it's actually from Old Latin. And it's closer to the idea of a disciple, where the idea behind it is instruction and teaching, not laying the smack down.
Wow.
So it's more about looking at your kids as disciples in the midst of formation.
One way to do it.
Rather than little shits who are hell-bent on ruining your life and you have to lay the smack down. So just getting clear on discipline is actually teaching. That can really help. And that brings it back to what I said earlier about how think about what lesson are you trying to teach your kids. So in terms of getting everyone on the same page, first of all, having a conversation about that can be helpful. We're coming to discipline as we are teaching our kids something. They are in the midst of formation and we are here as the leaders for them. That can be helpful. Now, when it comes to everyone on the same page
they
after
know
that
mom is the
conversation,
headmaster, right? So
the first
they
question
get
I
that,
ask
right?
people to ask themselves is, are these people even open and receptive to my message? Because if they're not, you can say it 50,000 times. in a million different ways and it's not going to land because they're not open. And it's nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your message. They're just not open.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, that's okay. I think we stress about everyone having to do all the things the same way as us. It doesn't have to be that way. We can just accept that, you know what, I cannot control other people. I can only control myself. And I have lots of work to do on myself already, so let's start there. And I always tell people, all is not lost. A lot of times people will feel like, you know, a very real example, one of my clients, she was trying to be more patient at the dinner table. Kid was taking a longer time to eat. And the husband likes to bring the cane out and whack the table and say, if you don't finish your food, this is coming.
Okay, one way to do it.
And so very common in Singapore. And so she's trying to, you know, parent her kids in a different way, and then husband's here and she feels this frustration. She's like, you are undermining me, you're undermining all the good work I'm doing. And I'm like, yes, your frustration is valid. However, try not to see it as undermining, because your kid understands that mom has a different way. Your kids are super smart. They recognize mom has this way, dad has this way. And ultimately, at the end of the day, our kids and the adults in their lives will get the relationship that they deserve.
And they know that, like, mom is the headmaster, right? So they get that, right?
I think it depends. And I think at the end of the day, you know, our kids, it's good for them to experience different parenting styles, different authority styles, because that's the real world. Not everyone is going to be like us at home, right? They're going to meet really assholic bosses and co-workers one day. And it's good for them to learn how to deal with different personality types. What I do stress, though, is that if there can be at least one kid in your child's life, assuming the person's listening to this, that would be you, one kid, one adult in your kid's life who can be that safe adult, who is not going to shame and blame and be punitive with them all the time, that is huge. That's all you need, really, just one person. And it's okay that not everyone else is on the same page. If they are receptive, going back to that first question, if they are receptive, have a conversation. And how you have that conversation is really important. Because
let's not be crazy here, Kelly.
Like,
Okay?
when I was a kid, you did this to me, I didn't like it. No one's going to listen to that, right? Coming in, being very clear that, like, you had your ways, and I think that's what you knew, and you did your best. I recognize that you did your best. That line can be so disarming and help. And some parents will still be like, I don't like what you're saying. Yeah. But, you know, just taking the care to be very clear that I am not blaming you. This does not come as an indictment of your parenting. This comes as we all have our best interests at heart with our kids, like the grandkids now. Yeah. Let's have a different way forward. And then being very clear that this is not your subjective opinion. This is what psychologists say. And for some of my clients, they use me. They'll like show my picture and they'll be like, I've hired this person as my parent coach.
Here's what she said.
She's saying it. I'm not saying it. That can really help, actually. So a lot of clients have told me that, like, showing them this resource, they're like, oh, okay, it's not you. You are not, you know, saying I'm wrong. She is saying there are better things we can do. It's not personal anymore because it's a third party. And actually, one of my clients had a really heartwarming story. She had a really difficult relationship with her mom growing up. And when she told her mom about, you know, she had joined Juicy Parenting and was learning all these things, her mom actually said, good on you. And she expressed regret and remorse. And she said, you know, in my time, I didn't have parent coaches. I didn't have this kind of membership and resource where I could ask any parenting question and get it answered. I didn't have that. And she said, good on you that you are seeking this out and you are finding a different way. She didn't go so far as to apologize. But I think that's crazy. But that's huge. And it was so big for her. She shared this. And, you know, it's just, I think we have to give our parents credit too. And one thing that it's so nice. One of my members, a dad actually, said this really nice thing, that our parents' ceiling becomes our floor. Meaning, so the best that they did becomes our starting place. And now we build from that. And then our kids will have our ceiling as their floor. And it's such a nice way to think of breaking intergenerational cycles, you know? Yeah. And like when it comes to filial piety, another member, a dad actually,
exactly.
had
know what you're doing is valuable,
thing to say about filial piety. At first, he was really one of my most skeptical clients. He was just like, there's no way this works. We're going to hit our kids. Like, no, we have to like rule with an iron fist. And he said, because my mom ruled with an iron fist and I'm great, look at me. And he's a very high-flying guy.
And do the opposite.
After doing my course and reflecting and, really trying to put it into practice, he came back in a different coaching call and he said, I've had a completely different way of thinking about this. And he said, with filial piety, it's all about honoring our parents and continuing their legacy, right? And he says, if I continue to do what my mom did, which was rule with an iron fist, extremely punitive, extremely harsh, I'm not actually respecting her legacy because I'm just doing what she did before. If I can go further and do better than what she did, that is truly honoring her memory. And I was like, mic drop, using that forever from now on. Credit goes to Young.
Thanks, Young.
Thanks, Young. And I think that is just such a good way of putting it. And he also talked about how, for men, it's a different way to think about these things. Men don't have the same feelings of like, I want to do better for my kids. It's more of a fear-based feeling of like, no, but if I don't do that, my kids won't be successful. And so once he turned his mindset around, now he's all in. Like he is star student. His relationship with his kids have completely turned. Like it's amazing to watch. And I'm just... Every time I hear stories like this, I'm like, yes, we got to keep going. We got to keep
going.
Exactly.
What you're doing is valuable, girl.
It's important, yeah.
So before I had kids, my husband and I had this conversation, like if either one of us is saying something to the kids, the other one should not go in and, undermine and do the opposite. Because I've seen it before, where one parent will be shouting at the kid or telling them to go to the room, the other parent will let them come out and be like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
How do you manage that sort of situation where the child is getting sort of mixed signals, like, oh, it's all right, mum's shouting, but dad's going to let me out, or vice versa, like... How do you sort of go ahead and sort of make sure that boundaries are in place, but they're not getting these mixed signals like, oh, you know what, my parents don't have a union in this space, so I can just do whatever I like.
Yeah. I think the first thing to do is what you and your husband did, which is have a conversation even before you have kids. It's so important to explore that, like what happens if
I love that
you say this and I say that, right? Having that conversation beforehand just to lay it out on the table is good. It's not going to be enough
let it off your chest, but
because when you're in the situation, a different thing happens. And so I think what's really, really important in those situations is tap each other out. So instead of coming in and undermining or doing the
that I wanted to talk
opposite,
about that you address
have an agreement that you will tap each other out when you see the other person at the end of their rope. And nothing good is going to come from whatever comes out next.
Your absolute shit. And this is something that is so hard for me. This is a pinch point for my parenting, which is when I lose my shit on one of my kids
beforehand,
or
because in the moment it can feel like, no, I'm going to double down. I'm going to dig my heels in deeper.
It ends up with me hating myself, thinking about it all night long, right? The kids are sleeping like little perfect angels, and I'm still just ruminating
Mom has said this and then
doing whatever and saying whatever. How do you
all is not lost. I think it's important to debrief with our kids
handle their mom rage,
to be very clear with them that, earlier you saw this happen and then that happened.
So it's like, how am I addressing my mom rage in that, like I said, thinking about it all night moment, and then the next morning when I'm waking up the kids, how do I then
doesn't happen again?
In a way that is
we're going to be having that discussion,
constructive?
and I will come back to you to let you know what our expectation is the next time around.
Yeah.
And then
I hope,
what's important is you and your husband
Kelly.
need
That's
to
what I
have
needed
that
to hear.
conversation
All of our listeners
or sometime when
need to hear.
everyone is calm and reset what is the boundary you're going to draw and agree with it. I think that is so key. I think people see that as like a kid's issue, like a parenting issue, but it's not. It's an adult's issue. It's a marriage issue. Talk about that first.
I love that you said, when everything is calm, go back and talk about it. Because I feel like in the heat of the moment, you will just say whatever just to, let it off your chest. But you're right, going back at a different point and then going and talking about it when everything's calmer does sort of put everything into perspective.
That's my in-laws right there.
Mental notes.
Ugly face.
That
whenever
really
my
good
daughter
point that I wanted
expresses
to
a
talk
negative
about that
emotion.
you address a lot on your Instagram page, which is this concept of mom rage.
Yeah.
And just
God, I have that.
losing your absolute shit. And this is
Yes.
something that is so hard for me. This
Yeah.
is a pinch point for my parenting, which is when I lose my shit on one of my kids or on my husband in front of my kids.
Yeah.
And both times it ends up with me hating myself, thinking about it all night long, right? The kids are sleeping like little perfect angels and I'm still just ruminating on, me doing whatever and saying whatever. How do you help women, particularly this is for women, handle their mom rage?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned earlier about debriefing with the kids, right? So it's like, how am I addressing my mom rage in that, like I said, thinking about it all night moment? And then the next morning when I'm waking up the kids, how do I then debrief with them in a way that is constructive?
Yeah, this is so important. Mom rage is a very real thing. And it's not just you, it's everybody. Honestly, it's
okay, thank you. Thank you,
makes
Kelly.
me
That's
feel
what I needed to hear. All of our listeners needed to hear.
If people are honest with themselves, mom rage is real.
Yeah.
And everyone goes through it. And there's a very good and real reason why. So if you think about little girls, how often are they allowed to express their rage? Basically not often at all, or not at all. And, you think about how little girls hear things like, don't be angry, turn that frown upside down. And you hear things like, once you start getting angry, once you start frowning, you're not pretty anymore. Do you want to be pretty?
That's my in-laws right there. So ugly face. Yeah, whenever my daughter expresses a negative emotion.
Yeah. And so as kids, particularly girls, we internalize the idea that rage is not okay, anger is not okay, we're not allowed to express it. But the problem is, your feelings will come out. They will come out. And there's no such thing as, repressing and repressing forever. It just gets worse. It's going to come out. And a lot of times it comes out when we are mothers and when we have kids because they trigger in us what we weren't allowed to do as children.
Oh, yeah.
And so and so I think, number one, to understand that it makes sense that mom rage is a thing. If you think of how little girls are parented, it makes sense.
Yeah,
and
no conditional
a lot
apologies.
of times, what's underneath rage? It's fear. It's the fear that you're not doing enough. It's the fear that you're raising entitled kids and brats. There's this fear, and underlying all of that is, I'm a bad mom. And then everything implodes. And so I think starting from a place of accepting that, it makes sense I have this rage inside of me. I was never allowed to express it. And I have very real fears that are powering this rage. Starting from that point and understanding and accepting and having grace for yourself is so important. And then as for what you can do about it, the debrief is so important. A lot of times parents will find that, their kids, are sleeping like angels, and then they wake up the next morning and they're cool. They're skipping off to school. They're like, hi, mom. They don't seem to have any kind of lingering feeling, whereas it's us who are ruminating inside. And I always tell people, don't assume that your kids are cool. They are cool because they're skipping off. However, the feeling that they might have is likely still there. They just don't really know how to express it, especially if your kids are very young. And so it's always important to have a debrief. And the one line I ask people to remember is, my feelings are my responsibility, not yours. Right? So when we apologize to our kids, I'm a big fan of never apologizing with the word but in there. So just, I'm sorry I yelled at you.
Yeah, I feel like therapy needs a new rebranding.
But you were throwing
right?
whatever.
Therapy needs some new juice.
It's important to just own what we did wrong. It doesn't matter what the cause is.
No conditional apologies.
Yeah. So I'm sorry I yelled. And then just say what you noticed. What did the yelling then elicit? So I'm sorry I yelled. You were frightened when I yelled. And I want you to know my feelings are my responsibility. I am working on how to express my anger in healthy ways because you don't deserve to be my punching bag. You don't deserve to be my emotional punching bag. And it's so powerful for a kid to hear that because think of the message they are learning about their self-worth.
But then
they're now learning they're not responsible for other people's feelings. I don't have to take on my mother's mom rage. I don't have to be a good girl and sit there and be like, okay, I just won't move until mom is happy again. And that's huge for women, the women that they then grow into. And so mom rage is a topic that's very dear to my heart. And I really just want to normalize the fact that, everyone give yourself grace.
There's a car coming,
you
it's
are not a monster.
Response.
There are many reasons, and that have gone on for generations why women have such a difficult time expressing rage in a healthy way. And please go to therapy. It really helps. And I think in Asian cultures especially, there's a lot of stigma around therapy. It's like you have something wrong, therefore you have to go to therapy. But I really see it as performance coaching. Athletes get it, right?
Yeah. The mom who cried wolf.
You get a coach
the mom who shouted wolf.
See where you could do better, what blind spots you have. Why wouldn't that be the case for our internal mindscape as well? And our heartscape?
Therapy needs a new rebranding.
Right?
Therapy needs some new juice.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, therapy has helped me a lot with mom rage because it's helped me understand why I get ragey in the first place. And once I understand that, I can kind of just accept, I was never really allowed to express rage as a kid and explore, okay, how can I express it in a way that doesn't scare my kids? I'm allowed to feel rage. All feelings are okay, not just happy ones, also sad and angry ones. They're all okay.
Yes.
Please. I had a comment from my eldest son. He said, Mummy, you're always shouting. I'm like, oh God, yeah, I know. But then I think they know the difference between me sort of talking loudly when I'm trying to get them to turn the TV off so we can get out for school.
Yeah.
And then obviously clearly ignoring my response of TV needs to go off now, we need to go to school, to when I really shout. And then they'll always say, oh, you scared me. And I'm like, that was the point. I do it. But to the point where, it's to scare you so you don't, step out into the road and there's a car coming. It's like a immediate response for you to stop doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of know the difference between my shouts and my shouts.
Actually, that's such a good point, because if we're shouting all the time, like shouts all the time, then they're not going to actually hear it when we really need.
Yeah.
Like you said, when it comes to danger, running across the street.
Yes.
the mom who shouted wolf.
Shouted wolf, exactly. Like we have to
Thanks for
reserve those
forcing that
moments for
boundary,
when
Mom.
it really calls for it, where there is imminent danger.
Yeah.
That's
and I
important.
think there needs to be that differentiation as well, because there've been moments, like, I don't know, one of them will, kick a ball or something, and then it's like immediately like, stop, and they're like, you scared me. I'm like, that was the whole point, because then you kind of stopped what you were doing, and I think you kind of need to have that moment. Whereas, if your mum is always shouting, I mean, I am shouting, but I think it's more sort of loud voices like, turn the bloody TV off.
Actually, can we talk about turning the TV off?
Oh, yes, please.
So,
And Kelly, you have given us
one
so
of the
many
things I hear often
actionable
is
tips
I
like
have to
that
nag
today,
so
and I
much,
thank
I
you
have to
so
say it
so much
over and
for
over
being here
again.
to,
I have to repeat
for us to
myself,
hear
and that's
those
a
and start
big
to
trigger for a lot of
practice
people.
those in our everyday
in part
parenting.
because when they were young,
but
they
one of our
felt
big
unheard.
questions that we ask
So
all of our guests, and I would
having to
love to
repeat
hear
yourself
from
over and
a
over again
parenting coach.
ignites
Again,
that
your kids are very
resentment
similar
of
in
like,
age to my
hear
kids, right? So
me.
we've got young
You know,
kids.
so okay, first of all, there's that.
How would you
But I will
describe
say that, you know what,
your
if you're
40s
feeling
formula,
that, it's time to
knowing that a
stop
lot of our
repeating
listenership
yourself.
has older
Stop
kids, right? Tweens,
having to
teens, they're
go
going into
there.
that age.
So
What
I
is your
always say,
overarching
tell your
40s
kid what you
formula
expect,
that parents
right? So
in
in 5
this
minutes, the
decade
TV is going to
can
be turned
use
off.
to help them establish
And then
better
5
relationships?
minutes, if you want, at the 2-minute mark, say it again, if you're able to.
Yeah,
and
this
then at the
is our big
5-minute
one. I
mark,
mean, that's
they
why
don't
we
want to turn the
created
TV
this
off,
podcast.
right? And then so be very clear that, yep, it's been 5 minutes. You can turn the TV off, or I can. You decide. They don't want to turn it off. Okay, thanks. I'll decide for you then. And then you turn it off. And just accept that they're going to be unhappy about it. No kid's going to be like, okay, Mom, you're the best. Turned off the TV. Yeah.
Thanks for enforcing that boundary, Mom.
Yeah, of course not. They're not going to. Just accept that resistance is going to come, and you are doing your job. It is okay for your kids to be mad at you. They are allowed to be upset with the decision you've made. And I think that can be so helpful, because a lot of times people move into permissive territory because they're like, but if I go turn it off, they're going to be upset. I'm going to have to deal with a meltdown. Blah, blah, blah. Like, that's how you move into permissive territory. Don't do that. Just be clear and accept that the meltdown's going to happen. They are allowed to be upset. The TV is still getting turned off.
And Kelly, you have given us so many actionable tips like that today, and I thank you so much for being here to, for us to hear those and start to practice those in our everyday parenting.
Both.
But one of
All.
our big questions that we ask all of our guests, and I'd love to get this view from a parenting coach. Again, your kids are very similar in age to my kids, right? So we've got young kids. How would you describe your 40s formula? Knowing that a lot of our listenership has older kids, right? Tweens, teens, they're going into that age. What is your overarching 40s formula that parents in this decade can use to help them establish better relationships?
Yeah. I love that question. I love that you ask everybody this question.
Yeah, this is our big one. I mean, that's why we created this podcast.
So good. I mean, I would say that, for us, when our kids are young, the transgressions are minor. Spilling a cup of water, drawing on the wall with markers, right? But when they're older, when they're teens, it's going to be things like dating an unsavory character, coming back from the bar with someone who's offering to drive you home, but they've been drinking too, right? And I think it's really
Thank
important
you
to
so
keep that
much,
perspective
Kelly.
in
Again,
mind. That the work
I think
we're
you made
doing
both of
now,
us feel like
even
more confident
in
parents just sitting
women in
across the
their 40s
table
with
from you.
older
So
kids, the
thank
work
you
you're
for
doing now is
being
so
here
important
today.
because we're going to
And
get to
again,
that
for our
stage
listeners, I know that you
where
provided
kids
a
are going
ton
to
of
be
valuable,
making
actionable
mistakes that
tips
are
today.
much
So we
more
really thank you for being
life-altering,
here.
with much bigger consequences.
Thank you.
And how willing are they to come and tell us their mistakes? That all starts now with how we respond to the little mistakes today. So all the investments you are making into having a trusting relationship with your kids as a woman in your 40s, that is going to pay off when you're in your 50s, in your 60s, and when they come back for Chinese New Year later on, or Thanksgiving, whatever it is,
Both, all.
all of the above.
Christmas.
That's all going to pay off. So really stay the path of cultivating a deep and mutually respectful relationship with your kids. Respect can't just go up, it has to go down to our kids. They will feel that. And that's when, when they're at the sidewalk deciding, should I jump into this drunk driver's car or should I not? That's when they're going to be like, you know what? I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to call my mom. She's not going to be happy that she got woken up at 3 a.m, but she's going to be my safest ride home tonight. And I would rather call her than jump into this drunk dude's car. And I think that is a North Star that we can hold with ourselves to know that this will get better in the decades to come. This is the foundation we are setting up to lead our kids, but also ourselves, up for success.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Again, I think you've made both of us feel like more confident parents just sitting across the table from you. So thank you for being here today. And again, for our listeners, I know that you provided a ton of valuable, actionable tips today. So we really thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Guys, you know how much we love coffee. And if you want to show us some love, you know you can get us one.
Just visit buymeacoffee.com/the40s formula. Cheers.
Peter Lowe left us this review after listening to episode 6 with Tina. Love that you ladies are keeping it real and sharing personal stories. Love listening to this podcast on my walks. Keep up the great work. Also, I like the little Easter eggs at the end of the podcast. Very Marvel. Lol.
Well, we are so glad that you love Ponderings with Paul at the end of our podcast. We're definitely going to keep that coming. And also, we appreciate you walking while you listen. Guys, get your exercise and listen to the 40s formula. Before we go, please remember to hit subscribe and take a moment to support the 40s formula by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform.
Your reviews will help us to reach more people and allow us to continue to bring valuable content. It should only take a moment, and it's a free way for you to support the show.
You can also stay updated with the 40s formula by following us on Instagram at the 40s formula, all one word. We share behind-the-scenes insights, episode updates, and much more, so please be sure to hit that follow button.
We appreciate your time and support. Thank you for being part of this community, and we'll be back next week for more empowering conversations with inspiring guests.
Bye.
Actually got goosebumps when you were talking about the drunk drivers.
Yes.
And I was like, fuck, is that what I'm going to have to deal with?
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Again, we didn't even get into like screen time, phone use, all that
Yeah.
stuff. But it's like that's the stuff. It's like I lose my shit over things like scribbling on the wall.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example. And it's like that is such a. I'm going to pray for scribbles on the wall the
Yes.
first time they come home with like some like sexy text on their Snapchat or
That's
whatever.
right.
And I'm like, what the hell is this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the only chance we get of seeing that Snapchat text,
Is if we establish this.
because otherwise they're going to hide it. They're going to know mom flips the shit out
Yeah.
when anything untoward happens. So
Yeah.
hell no, she's going to see this. But I want my kids to be like, this dodgy dude messaged me today. Have a look. I
Yeah.
want that relationship. I didn't
Yeah.
have that with my mom.
And I'd be like, let's go together and find him. We'll make
Mom's gonna
it
kick
a
the
mommy-daughter
shit out of him.
activity, and you can watch me lay down this guy.
Yeah.
That's why you do CrossFit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, honestly,
Exactly.
I know.
You
I
will
told
pick
you
him
this.
up
I
and
told my
throw
husband,
him.
I said, when our kids are teens, that is my time to shine.
Yes.
Because then they'll get all my jokes.
Yes.
I'll be able to sarcasm them right in the face, and they'll understand that I'm, pulling their leg. It'll be great. I can't wait.
Love it.
Give me 10 years.